Hi there, I'm Clifford Bates, and welcome once again to reading Locke's second treatise. Today we are looking at chapter 15 of the second treatise, which is called Paternal, Political, and Despotical Powers Considered Together. Now, this is kind of like a this is where he kind of go gives kind of once again he offers a summary of what he's covered in earlier chapters and ties it all together to a certain degree. Particularly the early chapters, all the way from the beginning, the question of what is political power, what is paternal power, what is political power, and what's despotic power, and how they differentiate. And and actually, this takes us to the very beginning of the first chapter, where he has that famous line about the. We'll just look at here. Just my copy here. He opens up about the difference between. And this is that. This is in the. Uh, uh, Chapter one, the second section, he says, he says he wants to talk about what is political power, right? He says that power of a magistrate over a subject may be distinguished from that of a father over his child, a master over his servant, a husband over his wife, a lord over his slave. All which distinct powers happening sometime together in the same man, if he be considered under these different relations, right? It may help us to distinguish between these powers from one another and show the difference betwixt a ruler and a commonwealth, a father of a family and a captain of a galley. Right. This is the two. Now three ends a short little paragraph. Section three is political power. Then I take the right of making laws and penalties of death, and consequently all the penalties for the regulating and preservation of property. Right. So therefore, he defines political power back all the way to chapter one. Now he's coming back to kind of address these questions. So let's look at this is at 169. It's a very short paragraph. It introduces this thing. He says, though I have had occasion to speak of these separately before, yet the great mistakes of late about government, having, as I supposed, arisen from confounding these three distinct powers one with another, and it may not, perhaps, be amiss to consider them here together. So he's basically saying he's discussed all these three separately. Now he feels he has to again bring them all together because what's happened is that there's been this great misunderstanding. He means here, in his context, he means the Stuart monarchy. Okay, he means the Stuart monarchy in a sense. There's and there's a tendency in European monarchs. The argument is of this period, the so-called absolutism. Right, this is the absolutism. And some even argue this is a challenge to Hobbes. Okay, because at some level, Hobbes presents a very extremist case on the authority of the sovereign as being absolute, undivisible, unquestionable. Particularly if you look at Leviathan, chapter 9, all the way chapter 19, where gives he gives 10 rules. And is it 19? He gives like the 10 rules of 10 commandments regarding the institutions of this, like 10 guidelines, the consequences and institutions of the sovereign, right? The rights of sovereign by institution, right? And then he gives the 12 things, and some of them are like, no man can, without injustice, protest against the institution of the sovereign declared by the major part. Sovereign's actions cannot be accused by the subjects. If you read this, it sounds like, in many ways, people have always kind of read Leviathan, and particularly the thing, and it's confusing because Hobbes does. I mean, if we look at Hobbes as Leviathan in that sense, it is kind of he confuses the people. It's very easy to confuse the person of the king with the Commonwealth. Okay, the person of the Commonwealth. Okay, there is this two bodies issue. There's two he's, the two persons. where the sovereignty is a function of the Commonwealth, right? And power is function of the Commonwealth, and that from that level, the institution of the state or the institution of the political form cannot be questioned. Now, Hobbes doesn't seem to suggest this. He's talking about the person of the king, I think, in many ways of this. And here, I think there is, and in fact, this is where Hobbes is a little murky on purpose because I don't think he really wants. He really looks at divided government or parliamentary things as because of the nature of those systems, it leads to uncertainty and problems and disputes that then cross over and to cause civil strife, civil chaos. Um, and he actually he just has a view that a king, monarchy is just to be better. It's not there's not a question. It's not prone to dispute in the sense. So I mean, you can look at therefore you can see kind of at one level you could see this as much a debate between Hobbes and Locke. Locke is saying, well, Tom, I don't necessarily agree with you on this. But the problem here is that he's still working within Hobbes's framework. And that sometimes Hobbes is a little bit more consistent than Locke is on this. And actually, sometimes Locke is more seeing the negative consequences of some directions and wishes to back away from the more extreme positions that Hobbes's logic would take, or if you followed Hobbes's position to its logical extreme, right? So let's now look at 170, okay? First, then, parental or paternal power is nothing but that which parents have over their children to govern them for the child's good till they come to the use of reason or a state of knowledge wherein they may be supposed capable of understanding that rule, whether it be the law of nature or the municipal law of their country, that they are to govern themselves by. In other words, they're able to understand. Now, okay, so adulthood does not mean you get an age, but it becomes a coming of age means the ability to understand and understand and understand literally means to understand the implications of them, to understand the things of it simply does not know what they are, right? It is to understand their role and their function and why they're there, and the consequences of things, the costs first, and the costs and benefits of them, right? And why it's best that one obeys or fouls them, right? So there is this kind of concept of reasoning and possessing of reason in Locke here that I think we underestimate. Now, this is not the second we become of age. No, the Locke earlier said that simple-minded people never get there. They never obtain this reason. Okay, and therefore there is this kind of now this is that famous criticism of Aristotle, right? Since Aristotle believes that there are natural slaves, um, uh, 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 Locke just simply says, listen. He doesn't like the term slavery. For him, slavery means is to be under arbitrary authority of others. Okay, the natural slaves of Aristotle are not under arbitrary. Um, they're not conventional slaves in that sense, in the sense that they're used for the purposes of for the benefit of the master. More that they are people incapable of exercising government, exercising rule for themselves, unable to know what's their own good, and that without guidance and without paternal care, some kind of care of them, they will never be able to live or live in a community and live in society. So they need perpetual care. These people. The natural slave is not capable of self rule, self governing in Aristotle. In fact, to free a natural slave would be the most unjust thing you could do. Okay, so Locke is saying in this sense, but Locke's understanding of what's happening here is that Locke defines slavery as being under arbitrary rule. So therefore, I don't think, from, if you're going to apply Locke's language to Aristotle, um, you wouldn't call it natural slave. You'd call it unfree person. The unfree, those who are incapable of being free in that sense. But that's okay. Let's think about this, right? But the purpose of parental rule is paternal care, the care of the child, right? And to prepare the child for self-government, to being able to be independent, to make their to be able to exercise reason, to understand the rules of to understand the laws of nature, or then the and the laws of civil of the society they're in, and capable of and to govern themselves by, right? Capable, I say, to know it as well as the several others who live in freedom under that law. So therefore, by knowing it means that they come to the same level as most people who are free. So if you allow, in other words, Locke is not saying you need to have this perfection of only those who are really, in other words, it's not really a high virtue. In other words, there is the Socratic concept that only the virtuous man could be free. Only the virtuous man would be the one who possesses reasoning in that sense, that understand the difference between his passions and what is right and what is good, and therefore, and good in the highest sense, not in terms of his pleasures, but in terms of his actual living beautifully, living well, right? So, um, and not just for mere life, but for the good life. Okay, so therefore, the question then for the classics was much higher. Now, here Locke will agree with Hobbes that the goal of this is not as the good life, but let's start with mere life and the goods of life. Our liberty, our lives, our liberty, and our property. Okay, that this is the end of government, not the good life. Okay, it's a lower end in that sense. Um, and therefore, the purpose of this is that they said the affections and tenderness. Now, this is the things that the affections and tenderness. And actually, I'm going to stop here. Go back here to live as freemen under free lord. Therefore, the expectation is not. It is basically again that there. Who is seen as a free person? They just have to be at the level of incomplete knowledge. They don't be perfectly wise or perfectly knowledge of their good. In fact, we don't assume, and a free society means that most people are allowed to make errors, allowed to harm themselves, and not in the true sense of harm themselves. Because remember, Locke would argue that you have no right to kill yourself, no right to take your own life. Right? You don't have the right. No one has the right to take another person's life, and you cannot consent to giving away your life in that sense, or or you yourself taking it and giving it away in that sense. There can be no right to suicide in Locke's view. It's in fact that the idea that someone would want to take away their life is maybe evidence that they're not capable of governing themselves anymore, need to be governed by others or controlled by others, right? Someone who can't control their urges to harm other people, or likewise, for Locke would maybe even call them beasts, right? But they have to be under control. In other words, that those who are going to harm other people, those who are going to act like beasts, and not respect the natural limits within nature. There was the idea. Remember, in even natural right, the argument was, in the state of nature, there's no right to take the life of a person, take the to impose your will on another. Right? He doesn't seem to say that is, and to take someone's life is simply just not a right or a thing that you have a thing to do. So this is that weird in that I mean, this is the idea that there is laws, or which Hobbes would disagree. That Hobbes would argue that in nature there's just simply there is principles, but Locke says there's principles. Sorry, For Hobbes, the, the reality is that there is no law, there's no justice in nature in that sense. There's no justice in the laws of nature in that sense. There are certain just facts and certain logical consequences, and the rules, and that the laws of nature are simply like physics, the laws of physics. Where Locke complicates it by suggesting that it is kind of a moral law, right? This is what we've seen so far. So now let's turn back to this point about this idea. Therefore, the idea that this moment you're the free person. In other words, the, once you get to that certain capacity, at the same level of knowing what the laws are, as the same level of knowledge that most free people, most of the other people who are adults and are free have. So therefore, it's not this kind of sense of a sense that uh, 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 um, you have to reach some perfection. Okay, it's kind of like a minimum level of standard, right? This is, and if once you meet that minimum level of standard, then you can do it. But the people who don't meet that minimum level, so don't reach that, still need to be cared for in that sense. This is a difference. Now he says the affection and tenderness which God has placed in the breasts of parents towards their children make it evident that this is not intended to be a severe arbitrary government, but only for the help, instruction, and preservation of their offspring. So therefore, in other words, this is the difference, this is the idea, and this is actually a very powerful criticism of the feminist view of patriarchy, right? This idea that patriarchy is oppressive, right? Patriarchy is the abuse of women and the oppression of women. No. The idea here is now a patriarchy is the form of fatherly care, right? This is the idea of the rules of the father over the family, right? Well, again, Locke chooses to say both mother, husband, father, and daughter, father and mother, right? But father as parent is still exercising paternal care, and paternal care is not arbitrary. It's not done. It's done for the sake of the child. Okay, it is done for the benefit of the child in this sense, and therefore it's again. This is why it's the preservation of their offspring, their benefit. It's not designed that it's not a thing. Therefore, it's not this arbitrary thing of and also abusive thing that modern feminist theory tends to, and actually a lot of theory thinks they want to denounce patriarchy. Let's denounce patriarchy. Why? Why? It's bad. It's unjust. Okay, why is it unjust? Well, because it's not consented to. The argument can be, or it's unequal. Okay, but Locke doesn't necessarily mean. Locke here says, listen, it's still beneficial. If it's beneficial, this is the problem. Yes, it is. Parental care is involuntary in the sense. That it is something that is there, but it's done why? For the tenderness and affection that parents have for their children. Now he brings God in here, so therefore most modern atheists would say there is no such thing as God, so therefore this is just Christian propaganda. No, no, no. Well, he couldn't at this time if he didn't mention God. He's already engaging in kind of Hobbesian framework, and many people at the time, Christians, thought Hobbes was an atheist, right? So Locke, if Locke embraced Hobbes and the kind of modern idea too much, he'd be charged with atheism. Therefore, and Locke doesn't want that to be marginalized, not to be excluded from the society in that sense. So he will clothe himself as religion as possible, I think. So, but he goes, but this happens as it will. There is, as I have proved, no reason why it should be thought to extend to life and death at any time over children, more than anybody. Oh no, no, more than over anybody else. Neither can there be any preference why this paternal power should keep the child, even grown to a man, in subjugation of his will of his parents. Any father then having received life and education from his parents obliges him to respect, honor, uh, 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 gratitude, assistance, and support all his life to both father and mother. Okay. Again, this is repeating what he said earlier about paternal rule, back all the way back there in chapter paternal. This is paternal power. This goes all the way back to chapter 6, all the way back to chapter 6, right? So and a little bit in chapter 7, but when the conjugal relations, right? Um, and thus, 'tis true that paternal is the natural government. So this is interesting that paternal rule is a natural government. He's going to say that, but not at all extending itself to the ends and jurisdictions of that which is political. Okay. So it's a government, but it's not a political government. But this is very interesting. It's a governing. It's a form of rule. I think this is why he confused. This is where Locke sometimes conflates things. I think this is a tendency. As he's conflating society, he conflates society and community very easily. He's conflating rule and government together. Whereas the classics would use government as, in other words, the power of the political ruler. Okay. Whereas, well, the idea of governing, right? Governing is ruling. That's another word. Governing and ruling means the same thing in that sense. So therefore, there is the synonymous that Locke kind of takes different these different words that came out of French, German, Latin, Greek, um, and had different concepts that may at times have been understood differently, but he treats them as the same thing: governing and ruling. Okay, so government as a and then government as being forms of government, which means forms of ruling over things that are political. So therefore, one says this, and therefore paternal rule is a natural government. So paternal, therefore these are three forms of. In other words, therefore there's in using the language of what he says here, you could argue that there must be despotic government, right? Despotic, and you can kind of maybe this is a little bit where Montesquieu kind of gets, the idea of despotic government, right? This monarchical, republican, and despotic government, right? Despotic rule. Um, so let's think about that for a second. In other words, not all extending itself to the ends and jurisdictions that which is political. The power of the father does not reach at all to the property of the child, which is which is only in his own disposal. So this is even more radical. The idea that the father's authority does not rely to the property of the child. Some might argue this is stretch. In other words, his logic of his argument requires this. But wait a minute. I'm sorry. The property of the children is often determined by the parents, and you know, things of what is their property. Sometimes parents will decide, well, fight with toys. The kids will fight over toys, and parents will decide and try to make peace or to establish some kind of order in with the children. And sometimes parents will deny children certain toys, or even punish children by taking their toys away and maybe even throwing them away or giving them to other people, right? As a punishment for wrongdoing. That's still their property, right? But wait a minute, has no only over. In other words, does not reach his property. This is where Locke makes this argument, so that his consistency, this is where the argument becomes unreasonable. And actually, this is why it's kind of, I prove this, overselling. He constantly uses prove here, and I think this is a level of overselling. That because wait a minute, I'm not that convinced. People, sorry, this power of this child does not reach. The power of the father does not reach all the way to the property of the child. That was, how convincing is that really, that argument? And if that's not convincing, then wait a minute, if this is supposed to distinguish, in other words, I would argue that the two are separate. I think the classics were, Aristotle's maybe a little better here than Locke, because Locke wants to make sure. See, Locke is so desperate trying to argue that property is a natural right. Property is something tied to personhood, and that cannot be alienated at all. Okay, and that government has no right to interfere with this. Hobbes would disagree that if property is a thing that can lead to, if disputes about property lead to conflict that may tear apart the society, then the common good requires you to take to address those disputes about property. Okay, and it might require you taking the property of what belongs to what someone believes belongs to them. Okay, 971. That's been a long. Secondly, the political power is that power which every man having in the state of nature. So, wait a minute. Political power is that power which every man having in the state of nature has given up into the hands of society, and there into the governors, whom the society has set over itself, with this express or tacit trust, that it shall be employed for their good in the preservation of their property. Now, this power, which every man has in the state of nature, which he parts with to the society in all such cases where the society can secure him, is to use such means for the preservation of his own property as he thinks good and nature allows him, and to punish the breach of the law of nature and others, and so, according to the best of his reasons, may most conduce to the preservation of himself and the rest of mankind. Right? This is the kind of general principle that he comes into that, and therefore kind of So let's look at that again. This is that semicolon. This is that weird semicolons, almost like full stops here. Then that's what the colons are kind of like a new sentence. Now he says the preservation of their property, right? Colon. Now this power which every man has in the state of nature, which he parts with in society, in all such cases where society can secure him, right, is to use such means in society is used for preserving his property as uh, again he thinks good. In other words, this is in the state of nature, right? And that nature allows him, and to punish the breach of laws of nature according to which his reason may conduce to the preservation of himself and the rest of mankind, period. So that the end and measures of this power, this power that we call political power, when in every man's hands in the state of nature, being the preservation of all of his society, that is, all mankind in general, it can have no other end or measure when in the hands of a magistrate, but to preserve the members of that society in their lives, their liberties, possessions, and so cannot be an absolute arbitrary power over their lives and fortunes, which are as much as possible to be preserved, but a power to make laws and annex such penalties to them as they may may tend to preserve the present to tend to the preservation of the whole by cutting off those parts and those only which are so corrupt that they threaten the sound and healthy, without which no severity is lawful. So therefore, this idea, in other words, there's a problem. The idea here is that there's going to be parts of the society that because of their actions, the individuals in that society, because of their behavior and their actions, are going to be disruptive, and even their some aspects of property, their property, their exercise of their property, and their and even their exercise of their lives, right, and their liberty, might lead to the harm of others, right? And there's no, and of course, there's no right to do that, but they're doing it anyways. They're acting arbitrary. They're acting to their interest, and they perceive their interest as acting against that, right? Well, okay. In the state of nature, everyone had to deal this with themselves. You form civil society and form judges so that there's no longer there is what there are institutions and bodies responsible to deal with this and to secure it and to have more power. The collective power is more power than individual power. So therefore, the magistrates are to deal with this using the collective omnipotent. Well, not I mean for Hobbes omnipotent, Locke it's okay omnipotent also, but I think it's not arbitrary. In other words, we're omnipotent but not arbitrary. Um, Here, this idea here is therefore they need what the hands of the hands of in other words, the exercise you have in the state of nature of power. And that's what this is interesting, and this is why political power and Locke is little problem because it exists within nature. In other words, political power is not something. A power of the a political power is not a byproduct of the political form, but rather it is the exercise of power by see it's power exercised by the political the political body whereas it's not a form of power, it is power, and power is what every man exercises in nature this ability. So this is interesting that what for Hobbes was called this liberty, right? For Locke, it's power, the power to act, the power to do. Um, this is this sense, right? Um, and that therefore that in nature, each one of us alone has power. In civil society, we transfer that power collectively with the agreement that this is done for the sake of our preservation of ourselves and our property, right? Our lives, our securities, and our property, right? And for our well-being, okay, the public good. So therefore, in other words, and therefore, if there's threats to that, you can react to that. Okay, law. This is how why civil government is designed for the preservation of life. And therefore to that you're still able to in the civil society you're still exercising to enjoy your life, your liberty, and your property to the degree that they're not infringing on the life, liberty, and property of others, right? That's that famous this idea in Locke. And when this kind of disputes happen, the magistrate is going to a judge, the political judge who's been appointed by the people, by the, under the society. Is the other thing. In other words, here he doesn't distinguish. It's it's the distinction between state and society is not all clear. It seems that government is here. The government or the rulers are exercising authority over society. And another thing about this is that for Locke, society is nothing more than the aggregation of people together. In other words, there is human nature, all human beings as a whole constitute a society, one society. So this idea, it's in other words, there's no limit to society. There's no intrinsic society is simply just the collection of the body or collection of people who are agreeing to work together. So therefore, society itself is completely voluntary. The logic here seems to be it's a voluntary. So it's a voluntary. In other words, there is the aspect of willing agency that makes a society. This is the social contract in that sense. The social contract is the contracting thing, as he says right here, right? He says, um, and this power has its original, right? It's that famous, origins. Really, that's this is old English. It's original only in compact and agreement, and the mutual consent of those who make up the community. Okay, so a community and a society, synonymous meanings. That's no difference. He says yes, that this is all by consent. So it's not only government is the construction by consent, it's society itself. And society and government are at one level the same, but no, but wait a minute. Society is the body, it is the whole, it's that form of all the people. And that in the state of nature there is society because it is the collection of all people. Okay. This is weird. Society is not. This is the thing in Locke. Locke is that society is nothing more than the aggregation of every human being, and the relationship of every individual. Whether it's and it's formation into a society, at least a political society, or one of ruling. See, in nature, there's no ruling authority. There's no authority. And without the authority over somebody, and therefore the establishment authority happens only through consent. This is the logic. Now, let's move now to the next thing. We're talking too much, and I'm talking too much. All right. 172. Thirdly, despotic power is an absolute arbitrary power one man has over another to take away his life whenever he pleases. This is a power which neither nature gives, for it has made no such distinction between one man and another, nor compact can convey. Nature does not give this power because there's no clear distinction, right? Master. And so this is where there is a dispute between Aristotle and Locke here. Locke wants to completely deny that there's no natural, there's no, but again, this is framed by arbitrary power in that sense. An arbitrary power means the power to take one's life as they please, right? And this power is neither given by nature, for it is made no distinction between one man and another, nor compact can convey. For a man not having such an arbitrary power over even his own life cannot give another man such power over it. Again, this is his famous argument. You don't have power over your own life. But again, I think this is he's relying on Christian notions of it's a sin to commit suicide, right? He's piggybacking a lot of Christian morality. Locke here is on this principle, and therefore that there's this notion that Locke has previously done. You have no right to take your own life. In this way, I think maybe Locke is less consistent than Hobbes is. Hobbes, you have a right in nature, you have a right to do whatever you want, and while no sane man would wish to harm themselves, but an insane man might. In nature, there's no way that that everyone's want or right is as good as everyone else's. Yes, reason would dictate that this is madness, but there's no mechanism to judge the right and just usage and not just usage. That something may be rational, but if someone wants it and they have the will to achieve it, it's not natural. It's just that that nature has no means of preventing it or punishing it in that sense. There's no corrective. There's no natural corrective in this sense. And I think Hobbes. Now Locke, it's kind of more complex. He just no, but again, I think there is this. There's no corrective. The only corrective is individuals themselves. Again, that's Hobbes as well. And then only when by creating society or creating the social contract and creating a sovereign and creating this artificial person, Hobbes, that you get this powerful being, an omnipotent creature, a mortal God, right, who can secure the rights and safety and deal with these problems, right? But can be no arbitrary aspect of this, right? Power over it, and okay, have such arbitrary power of his own life, cannot give it to another man to have such power over it. But it is the effect only of forfeiture. In other words, you can only live your life if you forfeited it, if you did something wrong, which the aggressor makes of his own life when he puts himself in a state of war with another for having acquitted reason, which God hath given to be the rule betwixt man and man, and common bond, whereby humankind is united into one fellowship and society. So therefore, there is this argument that, again, he's relying on Christian. He's bringing in the Christian position here, and he's masked. This is a mask work because I think there is this contradiction in it, which God has given to be the rule. So reason is the rule between man and man, right? And that there's a common bond. Again, this is where Hobbes is completely opposite. There is no common bond, or can there be common bond? And but there is this common bond. Therefore, society is all humanity. And this is where, if that's the case, right? If there is a common bond between humanity, and this is the one fellowship and society, then there's a world state. You want to know what the idea of the Kojevian concept of the global hegemonic, world state? Well, Locke maybe it's right, Locke, because it's there in nature. We all have this. So maybe we want to achieve what in our idea of this political state is to fulfill the natural right, or in other words, the laws of nature, and that since there is a fellowship between all men, then okay. So, I mean, this is where you can go. You can see how Hegel, you all the Claremonsters, the students of Jaffa, who wants to endlessly whine about the German influence of Hegel on the progressives, and this is a destruction of the American. No. Your culprit is Locke. If you don't like this idea of the global state and world state, Locke is as much of a culprit of this, because he assumes that there is, in other words, we can make an argument that there is a common humanity and common fellowship because of our humanity. But that does not create a society or a community. That communities are particular. The Aristotelian conception of community is a particular place, people at a particular place sharing a life together. Okay. Locke, that doesn't matter. It's just simply that you're just there and you're together. You're all part of the same thing, all right? And it becomes political through agency of will. So therefore, given that we're one human beings and we have a common fellowship, we have to share the same reason. We have the common fellowship and a common society. Then the logical conclusion of such government is global government. That's it. And in other words, and let me stop here. Semicolon. He goes there, and let's finish the sentence. And having renounced the way of peace, which that teaches. In other words, this is the idea that someone who's quitted reason, they've broken the things have come up. In other words, there is this, reason is the thing between man and man, and there's a common bond with this. Therefore, someone who's going to do what harm the common bond, therefore they forfeit their life in that sense, right? They wage war. They use teach of peace. In other words, that nature, the laws of reason, the fellowship of man leads to peace. And made use of the force of war to compass his unjust end upon another. where he has no right, and so revolting from his own kind, that to the beasts, in other words, by making force, which is theirs, to be his rule of right, and renders himself to be destroyed by the injured person and the rest of mankind that will join him in the execution of justice as any other wild beast or noxious brute which with whom mankind can neither have society or security. Now there's a note here, and I think that note is going to be in the next. Yeah, another corrected copy by Locke. He that he has a noxious brute, which is destructive to their being. Right. So therefore, so there's neither you can't. Now this is interesting. He renders here. He's rendering the I criminal. I mean, this is even more radical, right? The person who harms another is become an animal. If you use force against another, if you're using force against another because you want what they have, you're crossing the line. In other words, you are no longer a human being. You become an animal. And how do you deal with animals? You crush them. You you have no society. There can be no society with brutes. In other words, he says that notice, mankind can have no society nor security with wild animals. So come on, prisoners, criminals. Criminals are wild animals. You just exterminate them. That's Locke. That's the Lockean teaching. Why rehabilitate? Come on, they're wild animals. You can't deal with them. There can be no society with them, and they forfeit. They, by committing the crime, forfeited their fellowship with fellow men. They become an enemy of humanity, and therefore become beast-like. Therefore, then there can be no society with wild animals. So if they're criminals, they're now wild animals, and you should deal with them as you deal with wild animals. How do you like that picture of Locke? So let's continue. Now that's right here. And thus, captives taken in a just and lawful war, and such only are subject to a despotic power, which as it rises not from compact, so neither is it capable of any, but is the state of war continued. In other words, you conquer somebody, you can enslave somebody. In other words, it's in such. And actually, this is even the case. The idea here is that okay, in a state of war, if you're engaging war, the winner always imposes their will on the defeated until you can restore peace and then form a agreement where all the parties can join society. But if you can't form that agreement and that situation of peace where the parties consent to live together or to cooperate, not harm each other, the other group refuses to or cannot be trusted to abide by the rules of the laws of nature, not to harm other people. Then you rule them like wild animals. You put them in cages. You you do end up having the arbitrary power over them in that sense because it's war. War is the exercise of arbitrary power, and that therefore this conquest of others is kind of a continuation of arbitrary power, right? It is the state of war continued. For what compact can be made with a man that is not master of his own life? So therefore, if you're not master, you cannot. If a person, in other words, compacts cannot be made with people who are not there, who have a power to be master of their own life. But this is weird. Master of your own life doesn't mean can I take my life? No, it means by master of your own life here is that you are the capable of making decisions. Right, you're capable of understanding. You have the reason to understand the consequences of your actions, and can make agreements about what's in your advantage and what's in your interest. Okay, so therefore you have a very interesting situation. So therefore, if you don't have that capacity, you're not master of your own life, right? Then what? Then no compacts can be made with such people, right? What condition can he perform? What condition can he perform? And if he be once allowed to be master of his own life, the despotical arbitrary power of his master ceases. So therefore, again, if we decide that we're going to allow you to govern yourself, again, return your government, return to rule this, we think you're able to do that, then our power, the victor's power over you ceases. So the criminal, who's then we think that you can obey by the rules and things like this, then my power. Let's say prisoners are under the arbitrary control over by the prison masters, or by the society, because they're wild animals and they need to be treated like wild animals in this Lockean understanding. And that as long as they're seen as dangers, they are to be treated like one. The second you can see that they're no longer dangers and that they're capable of ruling themselves and perform a function, right? They'll be masters of their own lives, right? Then and they're not going to do harm to others, and they can be they're no longer beasts in that sense. That then there can be restored to their own self rule, and they're no longer arbitrary power over them. Right, that the power of the master ceases, and he that is that is master of himself and his own life, he has a right to he has a right to the means of preserving it. So if you're a master of yourself, you have a right to preserve your thing. So that as soon as the compact as compacts as soon as compacts are entered, right, enters, slavery ceases, and he so far quits his absolute power and puts an end to the state of war, who enters into conditions with his captive. In other words, once you enter, in other words, you're captive and like this, and I'm going to give you self-governing, and do this. I'm going to make you member and things. Then your power over you ceases. But then I have to treat you as no longer a captive. I have to treat you as you're now a free person, as free as anyone else is here, and capable of making your decisions. Okay, so that's that weird. This is why he does the criminal, but also the war, the concept of a captive, someone in war, right? So you engage the war with someone. Once you engage in war with them, you want to make if you until that they are determined, they are willing to agree and combine. They can't submit to complete arbitrary rule. Therefore, they're always, in other words, they can't agree to be a slave. They can't agree because slaves are never really agreeing to it. They're only there because that they're not ready to die, or they're not yet capable of throwing over their masters. The second that they can throw over their masters, they have a right to throw over their masters. Slaves do in that sense, because it's a state of war. Not any kind of form of arbitrary rule is a state of war in law. It is of all the power. So the condition of slavery is a continuous war between the master and the slave, and only force keeps them in. In other words, such a relationship here is only force determines them, only coercion. And like the idea of war is only determined by force. Okay, so this is why we have to be very careful in understanding what Locke says here about this, and that there is this problem here that okay, but then what happens when we brought you in? But now we're going to say to you, hey, you're capable of governing yourself. We're going to let you govern yourself. We're not going to. You're no longer a slave. You're no longer under arbitrary power. You have a right to everything. You have the right to want, but you have to consent to being under this structure. Now, if you don't consent, once you consent to being a member of the society, then you must be treated like other members of the society, and you must consent to it. Okay. If you don't consent to it and you want to rebel against it, and you reassert your authority, your society against the other one. What about rebels? Rebels who want to reassert their national identity against revolutionaries. Locke doesn't have much room for them in the sense that, and then we're going to have a big problem with right to revolution. Right, the right to revolution. It has to be people in the community and the majority must justify the revolution. Back then, in previous, and we'll see this later with dissolution of government. Right here, that this is therefore the idea is that and the question of people under conquest, who are they still under control, is that. But then a treaty, some kind of compact has been made. Now, the compact can be that they're now members of our society, or it can be that, okay, we defeated the Germans and the Japanese, and what do? We're going to let them govern themselves, but we made them sign. We They had to agree to something. They had to change something of themselves, and then we've said that, okay, great, you conformed, you repudiated what the your previous rulers did, and or what you as a nation did previously, and disavow it, and embrace the principles of law, and we think you're now capable of honoring them. We give you your right to govern yourself as a separate people. Right? That's international law, right? You've been restrained. You may have lost something. You might have lost property. As you know, may no longer have the same things you had before as a consequence of the war, and the cost of the war. But therefore, this is that idea in this Locke, in a sense. This is the idea of Locke but once you enter into agreement, then the power that conquered you no longer has command over you anymore. Because if they have command over you, you can't make an agreement. It's that weird. That if I have mastery over you, control over you, if I'm the master and you're not, then you cannot make an agreement. And you can only make agreement if you have consent. Okay, there can only be consent. So that's a weird thing, isn't it? How do you get that point? Basically, the other side has to kind of say, you're no longer a threat. I mean, look at this. You can't even agree to as long as I actually have power over you and have control over you, I have to surrender the control first so that you have some self mastery, and that therefore you can agree. So there's a risk that you might say, no, I don't. I want to go back. I'm going to reassert my other claim against you and re-enter the war. So therefore, then the war continues, right? So and then the powerful dominates over the power. The winner wins, right? And the winner imposes his will by force on the defeated. So it is that moment. What happens is that first, I mean, logic here is that the peace has to happen when at a certain time the winner is determined that the risk of letting you see if you will agree to the treaties. See, but this is not how really done. Usually, most peace treaties in reality are held with guns over the other guy. Very Hobbesian. Fear. You do this. Guns are there. We're gonna return back to war. And there, we've stopped. Of course, peace treaties often come. We've kind of had we often create a truce or a ceasefire that kind of stops the war, but has not reinstituted peace yet, really, the true peace, where everything's back to normal. It is that this is a, a pause button, right? The pause button has been pushed. Okay, let's finish up this last two paragraphs, 173 sections. Nature gives the first of these, viz., paternal power, to parents for the benefit of their children during their minority, to supply their want of ability and understanding of how to manage their property. By property, I must be understood here, as in other places, to mean that property which men have in their persons as well as their goods. So therefore, it's that their person property is also in their persons. So this is again, and I think this is directly tying to the medieval conception of the concept that and that material property and your personhood is tied, and things. This is the famous in international, and we know this theory from talking about kings and their land, right? The king's two bodies, his land and his realm, right? This is also true in medieval law about barons. A baron's property and his body is the same thing. He has two personhoods. They're his physical personhood and his estate, right? His estate, and that this is true of all estates in that sense. Anyone who owed property, that this is as much them as the property itself is part of them. That's why Locke is, and I think Locke here intentionally does not want to make he is bringing in this medieval construction here so that he can preserve property. In other words, as this fundamental thing that, and not something that is product of social contract. And I think this is his little but. And I think he does this because the um, isn't this is one of the reasons why many English political thinkers and writers looked at Hobbes as too arbitrary. The law itself determines all the rights and privileges, and therefore this was a little too, because in their tradition they understood that there was limits to, in other words, that once something was your property, it was tied to you, and it could not be arbitrarily taken away without some forfeiture by your part or failure on your part. The king, just the king. If the king gave you something, as long as you did what you were supposed to do and kept your promises, if the king gave this to you and your heirs forever, in perpetuity, right, and good service, even, right? The idea of good service. That's why the term is, the judges, all federal judges are said to be there for good service, right? Not for life. No, that means life. Remember that a lot of the language of American constitutionalism is English common law language. The law of rights can be understood also as privileges and immunities, right? This is how you manifest the concept of rights, of privileges and immunities. Life tenureship was called good privilege, good standing, in good standing. So you hold this in good standing. Phone calls. I thought I turned off the thing. Um, so therefore, there is this idea that property must be understood as their personal. So voluntary agreements give the second, viz., political power, to governors for the benefits of their subjects, to secure them in their possessions and use of their property. And forfeiture gives the third, and forfeiture, once you break it and breach it, gives the third despotic power to lords over their own benefits, over those who are stripped of all property. In other words, this is that weird thing in that sense that therefore this despotic power is those who are subject to arbitrary authority, to be ruled by authority, and they have no, and because they're under the authority of others and under the control of others, they have no self government, right? So, and forfeiture gives the third despotic power to lords for their own benefit. So, therefore, ironically, that the Lord benefits from this. He's doing this. He's, in other words, that the Lord benefits of the other over another. In other words, I have despotic power of me, and I'm doing it. And I think this is where he's trying to mimic Aristotle, because Aristotle argues that the purpose of mastery over a slave, the benefit to the master is for the master, and that it's only accidental for the slave, right? The purpose of this benefit, mastery in this sense is understood as benefiting the master. Um, how does that mean for Aristotle? But this is the inconsistency in Aristotle. Aristotle does two slaveries. That is conventional slavery, that it benefits only benefits the master and accidentally benefits the slave. In natural slavery, the only way that the natural slave benefits is being under the authority of being under the authorities of others. Therefore, they're only able to enjoy what they other people have in their capacities when they're controlled or mastered by their master. If they're not being, and master is the one who knows how to rule them and govern them. So therefore, there is like almost, in one sense, the natural slave is kind of a perpetual child in that sense in Aristotle, but where conventional slavery is a kind of arbitrary rule over another that is done by coercion for the benefit of the master. So there is this agreement here, an overlap between the kind of classical view and Locke here, and I think this is intentional in Locke because he wants to, he wants to repackage the Hobbesian framework in this way. In other words, blurring things. And I think this despotic power, the Lord to lords for their own benefit over those who are stripped of all property. In other words, the slave has no property, can have no property in this sense. But this is the funny part: slaves had property in a lot of the sense of the words. You look at the Roman history, there were people who were slaves, but were very wealthy. Okay, in fact, sometimes some slaves were very wealthy in Rome, the Roman Empire, and other places. It just meant that you lacked certain status and that you were still the owners, and the owners didn't care if you had property because um, if you had a rich slave, that was he just owed you some service. He just, as long as he did the service that that he was enslaved for, you didn't want to have, you didn't care whether he fed him. In fact, him being wealthy alleviated you of the need to feed him. Okay, in that sense, um, and this is something that we should pay attention to in that weird sense. So Locke insists that slave. In fact, maybe this is. Maybe we can argue that maybe the worst aspects of American slavery occurs by being Lockean. In other words, Harry Jaffa and his students, hey, hi there. Um, your Lockeans lead to far horrible more concepts of slavery. Your boy Locke says that, oh, if I have a slave, yes, it's coercion and things, but it still means, there's this idea that you have a right to those people who are beast-like, and we cannot contract with people who are wild beasts. And if I view you as not as a wild beast and a danger, someone who's a threat that I can't live in society with, then to what degree then it's for safety and security of my life that I have to keep you enslaved because we can have no peace. Ooh, see the problem with this, the Lockean conception of this. If you think like a Lockean, you think like the Lockean, slavery becomes a much more vicious thing. And that the character of slavery becomes more vicious. Property, in other words, this idea, they have no right to property. They can have no property. Completely arbitrary. But wait a minute, but the slave is property, my property. Arbitrary? Now think about this. This is the problem about this. Um, a wise person controlling property would not arbitrarily destroy his own property. Understand? The purpose of property is for its benefit and its use, right? Its usefulness to me, its benefit for me. So therefore, why would if I'm going to exercise arbitrary authority? No, sorry, you don't. You may have control, absolute control over your property, but anyone who just acts arbitrarily to their property is going to be a bad investor of his property. So good shepherdship and ownership, proper effective management of your property would not have you acting, being arbitrary with it. You want it to what? To expand, to make more, to be benefit, because you enjoy the benefit of this. You enjoy, in other words, you profit from it improving and doing. So your well-being is tied to its prosperity and well-being. You see the problem here with Locke's view? Locke doesn't understand. This is the thing, that there's something in the nature of property and good government that goes beyond it. It's not something arbitrary. It can't be something arbitrary in the sense. And therefore, slavery is not as it may be arbitrary in the sense that you're no longer master of your control, but to the extent that he wants to make it. See, Locke makes in other words, slavery a prospect of pure arbitrary rule, and an arbitrary rule you have no authority over it. Now, the question is what level of authority and what level of thing. In one level, yes, the slave has no right and authority to act without the master. But in reality, this is completely the reality of how master, because as property, you will seek to benefit it. Yeah. You're not going to abuse it. You're going to what? You're going to you might, okay, to the degree that it is not willing to participate in the thing, you might have to use coercion. Okay. And Locke is kind of right that Locke's view is that there can be never a situation where the slave accepts the slavery. But but I have a problem here. I'm not sure that Locke is right about that. We don't have the power. I mean, to what degree that if Locke is wrong about what if Locke is wrong about the question of the scope of consent? In other words, his idea is that you cannot consent to harm yourself. But people can do consent to engage in activity that harms them. You see the problem? People constantly engage in activity that they don't necessarily believe it harms them at first. In other words, then there's some people who what other people would think is pain, they view as pleasure. Therefore, they purposefully do things that others don't like. You call these these are mentally ill people, or people not effective reasoning. Okay, then they're slaves, right? In other words, they don't have the capacity to use right reason. They should be slaves in that sense. They need to be treated as subjects, not as masters of their own lives. But even there's not arbitrary authority. In other words, there's not mere arbitrary rule. I can torture them. No, it's again, this is the weird thing that there's. This is why I think he likes to play both sides in this sense. Locke does, and this is what I think. This is why I think he's slippery in that sense. Locke. In order to make his argument, he makes his very slip. He wants to make it so powerful, but this leads to consequences that I think you have to be careful about if you take it logically to their conclusion. Let's finish one last this chapter up. It's 174. He that shall consider the distinct rise and extent and the different ends of these several powers will plainly see that paternal power comes as far short that comes as far short that of the magistrate as despotic exceeds it, and that absolute dominion, however placed, is so far from being one kind of civil society that it is inconsistent with it as slavery is with property. Stop. Here, full stop. Okay, so therefore, first of all, we know paternal care is one thing. Given we've seen of these powers, paternal care and magistrate is like it comes far short of the magistrate. He has a scope of authority, but its tenure is tied to the child's ability to, getting becoming master of himself. Once the child becomes master, his authority ends. His right and authority ends. And whatever exercise of authority over the child is always for their benefit, right? Not for the master's, not for the parent's benefit, but for the child's benefit. So therefore, you have this very important understanding that political rule is kind of, we understand this. Therefore, it's limited and it's done. Political rule is common benefit, right? This idea of common benefit. This that the magistrate rules for the okay, maybe even that. This Locke, the purpose of a magistrate is to exercise the authority over the community, the society, and his job is to and he's exercising that power which in state of nature that every man individually, but exercises all that the people have given all their power over those such things to him, to exercise them collectively and to get them to assist to enforce and to secure the lives, life, liberty, property as much as possible but to secure the public good, right? So that everyone's good and their safety as a community, right? Now the problem with this is that if paternal power is insufficient to be political power, but despotic power goes too far, exceeds even that. It has political power, but exceeds it because of its arbitrary character. Its complete arbitrary character, and that absolute dominion, however plays, is not civil society. So civil society and domination, absolute domination, dominion, are antithetical to each other. But civil society here means this idea of literally, it means a political society. That's what it means. It doesn't mean what we understand civil society is often mean today. We understand that this is the social functions of a free liberal society, right? These are civil associations and things like that. No, civil society in Locke's understanding is simply just political society, the Commonwealth. It is the political society. Civil in this Latin sense of the city, the political. He's using it, he's not using, now we take Locke's concept and we turn it into something else, right? It is the political society where property matters, right? The purpose of political community is the protection of life, liberty, and property. And that as absolute dominion, and he makes a relationship. Given that slavery cannot, in other words, a slave cannot own property, therefore, as it's inconsistent. In other words, absolute dominion is as antithetical to civil society as the right to property and slavery is. Okay, so therefore there is like this parallelism here. And he says paternal power is only where minority makes the child incapable to manage his property. Political, where men have property in their own disposal, and despotic, over such as have no property at all. So notice the last sentence makes everything about property in controlling the property. Paternal thing is that they have no ability to manage their property. In other words, the child is not really capable of managing their property. parents have exercised management of them until they're capable of self-management. Political rule is when people have possessions of their own property and how it's their own disposal of it. Despotic rule is it's over such that have no property at all, and it's arbitrary. And there we end that chapter. Okay, that's it. I want to say, if you have comments or questions, please put them below. I will answer them when I see them. I notice, and when I see them, I do it. Um, this should be on the 4th, I think, of November. If we have any time, we have a couple more chapters. This is 15, so we have 4 more chapters. So sometime over the next week, I think we'll finish here, and I have to decide what I'm doing. And I'm actually thinking at this point that I might slow down. I'm kind of my schedule is kind of chaotic right now, and I'm not getting feedback by people, so I don't know what you guys want. I'm thinking about maybe I'll do Aristotle's Politics. I'm this semester, and this is in. Did you see this November? We're in my second month of teaching my course. Um, this semester is only 2 courses because of the schedule issues, and therefore I'm kind of upset about that. But the one course is on civil society, and we're doing themes of this question, and the other class is about Tocqueville. So I've been doing Tocqueville. It's been kind of little. We're still stuck in book 1, and we haven't really made progress. I'm kind of a little disappointed about that. But again, for you guys, I'm thinking about doing something like Aristotle or Montesquieu. Those are 2 books I think really that could be doing. And I really started something with Mr. President Sunday, but for reasons we opted to kind of not continue. I think his schedule problems and his ability to regularly do something. And unlike him, I don't care about YouTube drama. I don't care about Mr. Girl or whatever idiocy craps there is. This is the higher gossip, right? It's not even higher gossip. It's. I don't want to get vulgar, but this is really it's the world, the land of misfit toys. All these people are just the land of misfit toys. I'm interested in serious ideas and serious thoughts, serious writing. I'm here to help people. I'm really wish to kind of. I'm a teacher. That's what I'm doing. I'm also an expert in certain things. Okay, I'm not expert. I have an arrogant, Mr. Arrogant. Okay, Mr. Arrogant. Maybe I think too much, man. You big. First of all, I'm not a boomer. I'm an Xer. I come at the beginning of X. Okay, and I've always understood myself as a Gen Xer in that sense. I am not a boomer. I hated the boomers, and I hated, but I understood that what they were in that sense. And I remember reading how Strauss, back when it first came out in 1987, 88, the Generations book. So the 4th turning is not just something new that, oh my God, I knew about it. This is, and it's a interesting. I could probably do a big video about that. What's so good about Strauss Hall and the limitations of it. But this idea, I'm here not for this kind of. I've seen people and I've seen these discussions on YouTube, and I thought, my God, what, you're wrong. I used to scream at Sargon when he talked about Locke. My God, you're just wrong. And I used to scream sometimes at an academic age because I said, oh, you're kind of right, but you're wrong. And he should have known academic age and should sometimes know better, but I realized he was a literature professor, not a political scientist or a political theorist. So I kind of said, okay, there needs to be political theory. And I saw a lot of political theorists who do stuff on a thing. But no one really did something. And I'm not as charismatic as Jordan Peterson or, even some of the good political science teachers. Harvey or Mansfield, if he really did this. Yes, I always I saw when before he died, Paul Cantor was doing a lot in literature and politics, doing YouTube videos and things. In fact, I think if he didn't die, if he didn't die, I think he would have been doing more and more videos and producing more videos. Um, and even someone like Starkey is a good example of this. So I'm just going on. What the future of what I'm going to do here? We'll continue this. I'll continue finishing up the Locke, and I will I'm going to pull the trigger. I'm going to probably do Aristotle. I probably will use. I'm going to be using the Google Books Cons Lord second edition, most likely. I don't want to because I disagree with some. I mean, I like it, in some ways it's good. Um, I have disagreement issues with certain words. I'm going to really disagree with certain things. When I be looking at this translation, I'm thinking of the Greek word that's really there, and saying no, that's not really. But I will probably do that because I was out of consistency to this. Online there I have there you can find something online at archive.org of something I did in 2004, 2005 with a couple of graduate students about going over the whole politics. Because I have MP3s of that up there. So that's what I think I'm going to probably do next. That or Montesquieu. Um, Again, sorry for this what I'm going to do. So I just want to talk about it. If you like the video, like it, share it with other people. If you didn't like it, you can say suck. Say why. Comments again, as I said, put below, and I will respond to them when I see them. If you want to follow me on social media, you can follow me. The links are below. The links are below. If you want to help, like I said, I would appreciate help. You can always buy my book at Lulu again, the commentary on Aristotle. That's why I'm going to probably do the Aristotle because I'm going to use the Aristotle course as a kind of marketing tool. I don't shut up, Taylor. You're just talking too much. And if you again want to, you can help either by buying the book, or you can Patreon or Subscribestar. It's not like I have done anything on them. I'm not that good on social media, so therefore that's that. You have things. See you next time. We'll do chapter 16, and 16, if I remember correctly, is again we will look at conquest. So we talked about conquest a little bit today, about despotic, conquering another person. So we'll address the question of conquest. Conquest is a long chapter. I think it is the fifth longest chapter of Locke, if I'm correct. Yes, it's 22 paragraphs, 22 sections, sections. It is the fifth longest chapter of the book. We have, again, there is, so that we'll see what happens. And with that, have a good day. And I hope you guys, by seeing this, is after Halloween. So I hope you guys are all right and have a good day. Take care. Bye bye.